And one of our great pleasure, our great delight is to have Deepak coming to speak to us. Deepak is my dear friend and also my teacher. Two things together, that's a wonderful combination. And Deepak is bringing new awareness and new understanding, particularly, perhaps I should mention now, his new book is War of the World Views. And it's a science and spirituality, science versus spirituality, and science and spirituality bringing together. And written this book with Leonard Mlodinov. I can't pronounce his name properly. Deepak will pronounce properly. So this is something that we can look forward to. It will be out in October. And Deepak is going around the world to bring this science and spirituality together. This idea that these are two different worlds and they cannot meet, Deepak is challenging, has been challenging for many years, but this book is going to be a sort of really groundbreaking book. So without much ado, I would like to invite Deepak to speak to us this afternoon. Deepak.
If this is working, because our last session, this was not working. Can you hear me up there clearly? Okay. And how many people were here for the last session? So, you were here for the last session? How many people again? And how many people just came for this session? Okay. Well, the last session was about Tagore, in his relevance of Tagore and his interactions with Einstein, and why Einstein was wrong, even in his science, as far as non-locality was concerned, and Tagore was right, intuitively. And that's, I think, you'll hear more about it as we explore this level that scientists are discovering called non-locality. But Satish asked me for this session to focus on healing. And so that's what I'm going to do in the next 45 minutes or so, explain why healing is real, why there's a scientific biological basis for it, and why we can actually begin to replicate healing once we understand the mechanism. It doesn't mean that we're never going to get sick or never going to die, because you can die and still be healed, which is, of course, what I was reading about earlier when I was reading the poems on death by Tagore. So here we go. My background is in medicine, in neuroscience and neuroendocrinology. And I went to the United States after I finished from All India Institute of Medical Sciences. I finished my basic medical degree. And there were two things that happened in my life. Well, there were many things that happened in my life, but two things that are very relevant to what we're going to talk about just now. The first is that any physician will tell you, anybody who's in the field of medicine will tell you, that biological organisms, particularly human beings, do not respond in predictable manner to treatment. So it's something that we assume. You know, medicine is scientific. Medicine is based on reductionist science. Medicine, the brain and the body operate according to the laws of classical mechanics or classical physics. We assume that, but it's not true. Okay. You can have two patients who have exactly the same illness. They get the same treatment. They see the same physician, and they can have completely different outcomes. One person can die. The other person can recover. So that's a common thing. Physicians know about it. They don't talk about it. It's the unexplained phenomenon. It's the X factor. It's the white elephant in the room we don't want to acknowledge, because once we acknowledge, then we have to say what's happening, and then sooner or later we have to get into consciousness. So that's the first thing. The second thing is my own field, neuroscience, neuroendocrinology. This is in the earlier days when radioimmunoassay as a technique had just been developed. And radioimmunoassay is a way in which you can measure molecules in the body. Okay, so in the 70s, this had become very popular because two investigators, one by the name of Rosalind Yalow, had won the Nobel Prize. Now we can measure what's happening in biological systems. And we were measuring what are now well-known chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, opiates. Everybody's heard of these, I presume. And what one of my colleagues at that time, named a woman by the name of Candice Pert, who later on, she was a fellow, research fellow we were all kind of hanging out together. She later went and became the chief of neurochemistry at the National Institutes of Health. And she coined an expression which became relatively popular amongst us, molecules of emotion. So what her basic thesis was that emotional experiences generate molecules, and these molecules are neuropeptides because they're found in the brain, and peptides because they're protein molecules. And that when you feel different emotions, you have different body chemistry. Now that was very interesting to those of us who were interested in consciousness. And so we started looking everywhere in the body for receptors to these molecules. So, the first place obvious to look for was immune cells. Immune cells which go by different names, T cells, B cells, macrophages, etc. If you look at the receptor sites of these little cells, they have receptors to the molecules of emotion. So right now, somebody inside you is having a conversation with themselves. And this is a very interesting conversation because it has emotional overtones, whether you agree with me, disagree with me, whether I fit into your ideology about what is right, wrong, etc. The conversation never shuts up. It is happening right now. It's happening even in your sleep, in your dreams. In a moment, we're going to try and figure out who's this person who never shuts up. But the fact is that the cells of your immune system are responding to this conversation. They're eavesdropping. They're listening to this conversation. What's even more interesting is that the immune cells are not only listening to this conversation, but they are participating in this conversation because they make the same peptides that your brain makes when you're feeling or thinking. If you ask a good neurobiologist today, what's the difference between the immune system and the nervous system, they'll say there really isn't any. The immune system is a circulating nervous system.